The storm rolled over the prairie like a wild beast unleashed, rattling the earth with thunder and slashing the sky open with forks of lightning. The wind shrieked across the open land, tearing at fences, ripping shingles from barns, and thrashing the tall grass until it looked like an ocean under siege. The rain came heavy, soaking everything in its path, drumming against the ground with a merciless rhythm, and in the heart of it all stood a young bride, her white gown plastered against her trembling frame, her wrists bound cruelly to a wooden post outside an abandoned ranch house. Her veil was ripped away by the wind, her hair whipping across her face as she fought against the ropes that held her. Fear burned in her eyes, but so did something else, defiance, a flicker of strength. As if she refused to surrender to despair, she had been left there, abandoned as punishment, not because she had done wrong, but because cruel men with no honor wanted to teach her a lesson for saying no. No to a marriage arranged for money. No to a life of misery under the rule of a man she did not love. And for her courage they left her tied to the storm, certain she would break. But fate had other plans because not all men in the West had hearts of stone. One man, one cowboy, would ride into the storm and change everything. Through the sheets of rain, his horse galloped like a shadow against the lightning's glow. His hat pulled low, his duster whipping behind him. His eyes narrowed against the fury of the wind. This cowboy rode with purpose. His name was Colton Hayes, a man of the frontier, a man who carried scars not just on his skin but deep in his soul. He had lost, he had fought, and he had sworn long ago that he'd never get tangled in anyone's troubles again. But when word reached him in town that a bride had been tied to die in the storm, something in him stirred, something he couldn't ignore. He pulled his horse to a halt, staring through the downpour until he saw her. The sight pierced him, her gown soaked and ruined, her arms bound so tightly the ropes cut into her skin, her lips trembling as she whispered prayers to survive. His heart clenched. No woman deserved this. No human did. Without hesitation he dismounted, boots splashing in the mud as he strode toward her. She saw him through the rain, her eyes widening, unsure if he was rescuer or tormentor. But then he drew his knife, sharp and sure, and with one swift motion, he cut through the ropes that bound her. The bride stumbled forward, weak from hours of struggling, and he caught her against his chest. She gasped for breath, clutching his arm as the storm roared around them. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating his rugged face, the determination in his eyes, the strength in his jaw. She looked up at him, disbelief mixing with relief. Why would you save me?" she stammered, her voice nearly drowned by the storm. His answer was simple, low and steady, as if it was the only truth that mattered. "Because no one deserves to be left alone in the storm. You're coming home with me." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stop. The storm still raged, but for her, there was only him, this cowboy who had appeared like an answer to a prayer, his arm steady, his voice carrying a promise. She wanted to argue, to say she couldn't, that her life was complicated, that she didn't know where she belonged. But her strength was gone, and when he lifted her easily into his arms, she let herself lean into him, trusting him more than she trusted the world that had betrayed her. He carried her to his horse, sheltering her from the wind with his own body as best he could. When he lifted her onto the saddle, she clung to him, her hands gripping his coat as he mounted behind her. His arm circled her waist firmly, steadying her as he urged the horse forward. Through mud and rain they rode, the storm chasing them like an angry giant. She pressed against him, listening to the steady beat of his heart, finding a strange comfort in the stranger who had saved her. When at last they reached his cabin on the edge of the valley, Colton dismounted, helping her down gently. The cabin was small, sturdy, built from logs and weathered by years of storms, but to her, it looked like the strongest fortress in the world. He led her inside, lighting a lantern that cast a warm glow against the rough-hewn walls. She shivered, soaked to the bone, and he quickly fetched a blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. "You'll be safe here," he said firmly, his voice carrying both command and reassurance. He crouched down in front of her, meeting her eyes. "No one's going to hurt you again. Not while I'm breathing." Her eyes welled with tears, not of weakness, but of gratitude, of release after so much fear. She whispered her name then softly, as if sharing it was giving away the last piece of herself she still owned. "Clara, Clara," he repeated, as if promising to remember it forever. Through that long night as the storm howled outside, Clara told him her story, how she had been promised to a man she despised, how she refused, and how his men, had taken her to the ranch and left, her tied to the post as punishment. Colton listened, his jaw tight, fury burning in his chest for the injustice she had suffered. But more than that, he admired her courage, her refusal to surrender her freedom, even when it cost her dearly. "You're stronger than you think," he told her quietly. "The kind of strength most men never have." She looked at him then, really looked, and saw the man beneath the rugged exterior. A man who carried pain of his own but who hadn't let it turn him cruel. A man who had every reason to walk away, but instead chose to stand by her. And in that moment, she realized something. Maybe the storm had not been meant to break her. Maybe it had been meant to lead her here, to him. By dawn, the skies had cleared, and sunlight spilled across the valley like a promise of new beginnings. Clara stepped outside, wrapped in the blanket, breathing in the clean air after the storm. Colton stood beside her, silent, steady, his presence a comfort. She turned to him, her voice trembling but certain. "I don't know what tomorrow holds, but I know this: I don't want to face it alone anymore." He looked at her, his gaze steady and unflinching, and simply said, "Then don't stay, come home with me." And for the first time in her life, Clara felt what home truly meant. Not walls or a roof, not riches or status, but safety, love, and the arms of a man who would fight the world for her. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. And in that moment, the promise was sealed. The storm was over, but the story of their lives together had just begun. The morning sun poured gently through the valley, brushing golden light across the cabin's roof as if to wash away every shadow of the storm that had raged the night before. But inside Clara's heart, the winds had not yet stilled. For though she sat at Colton Hayes's table, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke, her hands trembling around the tin cup of coffee he had set before her, her mind reeled with questions of where her life could possibly go from here. She had been a bride in name only, promised to a man she despised, stripped of her freedom by cruel hands and left to perish. And now she sat across from a stranger, a cowboy with eyes that held both storms and steadiness, a man who had cut her loose and spoken the words, "Come home with me," like a vow carved in stone. And though gratitude pulsed through her veins, fear whispered still, reminding her that the men who tied her would not give up their pursuit so easily. For men who tried to control a woman through fear did not take defiance kindly. And Clara knew in her bones that the storm outside was only the beginning of the storm to come. Colton, however, seemed unshaken as he fixed his gaze on her, his rough hands folded on the table, his voice low and steady as he spoke. "Clara, you've got a choice. Now, one nobody can make for you, whether you walk back into that world and face them alone, or whether you stay here and let me stand between you and whatever comes." And though part of her wanted to argue, to remind him that she was nothing but trouble, that bringing her into his life meant inviting danger to his doorstep, another part of her, the part that had nearly been broken the night before, clung desperately to his words, because for the first time in her life, a man had offered not possession, not control, but protection and freedom all in one. She lowered her eyes to the coffee, then back to him and whispered, "What if they come for me?" And he leaned back, his chair creaking, his expression turning to steel as he answered, "Then they'll have to go through me first." And the certainty in his voice settled something deep inside her, as though his strength could anchor her drifting soul. But even as the warmth of